Hello and welcome to the National D-Day Memorials World War Wednesday presentation. Today I am John Long, the Director of Education here at the Memorial, and we are very excited about today's program with the very well-known and respected historian John McManus. Before we get to John, however, let me tease a few upcoming events. We actually have back-to-back World War Wednesdays because next Wednesday, the 25th at noon, naval historian Craig Simons will be joining us for a talk on the naval aspects of the Normandy invasion. And so John McManus, one of the premier historians of the land war and especially the U.S. Army in World War II, and then Craig Simons, one of the leading experts on the naval warfare. Two pretty good programs back to back. So join us for that one as well. And then if you've been watching our virtual presentations for a while, you know that our president, April Cheek Messier, and myself periodically will do a book club where we talk about a book we have read, enjoyed, and can recommend. Doing a little bit different on August 31st, going to be a kid's book. We're going to talk about the Magic Treehouse book that deals with D-Day, knowing that a lot of our supporters are parents and grandparents, and both April and myself have read these books to our kids. And so we're going to talk about how Jack and Annie visited the Normandy invasion. So join us for that, especially if you have kids or grandkids and want to get some enjoyable literature on their bedside tables. After that, our next lunchbox lecture for the fall will switch back to Thursdays, and our lunchbox lecture on September 9th will feature Flo Plana, who has spoken with us before, a good friend of ours in Normandy, and he will be addressing the Battle of Trevier in Normandy a couple of days after D-Day with a video and live feed from France. And so join us for that one on the 9th. And then our second September lunchbox lecture will be on the 23rd, and will be a virtual tour of a place I have never been but hope to go eventually, and that is the Museum of the Pacific in Fredericksburg, Texas. And if you're wondering why is the Museum of the Pacific War in Fredericksburg, Texas, because that was Nimitz's hometown. But we have a special behind-the-scenes tour of that facility on September 23rd. At noon. To back up, by the way, to September 9th, because of the time difference between here and France, that one will be at 1 in the afternoon rather than at noon. So a little bit of a later lunchbox lecture, but September 9th at 1, September 23rd at noon. And then our other big upcoming event in September, I'll mention, is our annual POW MIA commemoration on September 17th, and that will be live feed. So if you are nowhere near Bedford, you're certainly welcome to join us. If you are nearby, however, we'll also have an in-person ceremony. And so feel free to join us on September 17th to pay tribute to the prisoners of war and those that are still missing in action. And specifically some who have recently been identified through the good work of the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency and the science of DNA. So very fascinating stories that we'll be able to share on September 17th. But today, we are very pleased to have with us John McManus, who is and I hope I get this right, John, the Curator's Distinguished Professor of U.S. Military History at the Missouri University of Science and Technology. We got that. Does your business card have to unfold with all of that?
It does. It flips out. There's a bunch of cards.
So
you got it right.
But John is not only prolific speaker, scholar of the Second World War, but also a very prolific author. Most recently, Fire and Fortitude, History of the U.S. Army in the Pacific. The Army doesn't always get as much attention in the Pacific as it deserves, because, of course, the Marines were doing a lot of the fighting as well. But the Army was certainly there, and I certainly recommend that book with a sequel coming out eventually. John can tell us about that. But more relevant to our site and to our talk today is the dead and those about to die, history of the 1st Infantry Division on D-Day. And John's topic today will speak especially to some of those small units that led the way off of Omaha Beach, and in many ways helped to turn an impending disaster into the ultimate victory. And so John, and I also mentioned John is also a member of the board of directors of the National D-Day Memorial. That's another thing that we are very gratified to be able to say. And so, John, thank you for joining us, and I'll let you take it away.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks so much, John. I appreciate it. Make sure that let's start from the beginning. Make sure that my share is working here. Everybody sees it okay as I scroll back and forth, or
Yep.
Looks good. Okay, cool. Yeah. Tremendous honor, by the way, to be associated with the D-Day Memorial on the board of directors, but also to participate in programs like this that I think are just first rate and amazing. Today I want to focus on the aspect of D-Day that perhaps to set up Craig Simon's talk next week, that the naval part makes possible. Obviously, as you'll see next week, all the naval hardware is so incredibly vital and necessary in order to get the soldiers to the beach for this ultimate purpose of getting ashore in France. So what I want to focus on today is some of the first groups that are able to get off Omaha Beach and make a serious contribution to the outcome of the battle. Now, I don't think personally, as historians, we'll ever know with certainty, who the first person would have been, or maybe the first group or whatever. We could argue about that forever. But I don't think there's any question that we can identify certain individuals or groups who were certainly among the first and undeniably make a major contribution and sort of set the tone for the battle that is fought on Omaha Beach, something that I think we'd all agree is a seminal battle in American and all of military history. So specifically, my area of expertise is obviously, as John had said, the 1st Infantry Division, or Big Red 1. And really the place to start with any discussion of them is to just understand a little bit about the culture and personality of the unit. The 1st Infantry Division, as the name would indicate, was really a kind of foundational unit, and it's one of the first ones that goes into combat in, I guess, what we'll call the European and Mediterranean theaters in World War II. It spearheads the invasion of North Africa, later on the invasion of Sicily in 1942 and 43, respectively. And so it has seen a lot of combat earlier in the war. And it earned a reputation as a go-to unit, to gain objectives, to gain ground, to defeat the enemy in battle. It was really proficient at that. It was a fighting unit. It was a unit that had begun as a kind of regular Army formation and then is filled out with draftees and volunteers, of course, post Pearl Harbor. And so it is a pretty serious fighting weapon. And it is a tremendous asset to the Allied forces in the Mediterranean. When it was off the line, though, the division had a reputation, and its soldiers had a reputation as troublemakers. And believe me, that was well earned. These guys, had fought hard on the front line. When they got off the line, they were looking to blow off steam. They had, as many good units do, a kind of a mindset and a mentality that they were among the best, and that they couldn't tolerate those who were not among the best. I think sometimes this phrase that was really quite common in the 1st Division throughout the entire war kind of gives you a sense and a feel for how these guys thought of themselves and who they were. They used to like to say that the United States Army consisted of the 1st Infantry Division and 10 million replacements. That's it. There's been a turn the first. So
John, I think your internet is breaking up a little bit.
Due to action. The bigger one, I would say, in the composition of the unit by the spring 1944, is probably about 50-50 between those who've seen those new guys. What's important to me to understand is that the older guys have inculcated this kind of unit culture in many of the new guys. And the division is incredibly intensively trained, in addition, of course, to its kind of muscle memory combat experience. The division is incredibly and strenuously trained throughout that spring of 1944 by its new commander, Major General Clarence Hubner, to deal with any possible eventuality, not just an amphibious assault, but some of the fighting that they're going to see in Normandy later on, including town fighting. They are something prepared for. So you've seen the new guys come in, you've seen them sort of take on this new identity, and so you've seen, already at this point, the Big Red One has maintained that kind of character, but also that kind of chip on its shoulder that I think a lot of the guys who had fought in the Mediterranean felt they had done their part. And they were, less than thrilled for the quote honor of assaulting Hitler's Atlantic Wall on D-Day. Many felt they'd earned the right to go home. So you see this kind of surliness about the unit, but also this incredible proficiency, a kind of fun-loving aspect to the unit, a chip on its shoulder, all the above. And then you got new blood that's come in that has kept things fresh. Okay, so this is what they're up against. You're looking here in this map at the 1st Division side of Omaha Beach. Omaha Beach is about a 4.5 to 5 mile long crescent-shaped beach. And so it's large enough and a tough enough objective that the planners know they're going to have to send in the better part of 2 divisions. The 1st and, of course, the 29th Infantry Division, blue-gray, which obviously, the D-Day Memorial begins with the 29th Division veterans, Sergeant Slaughter, and so on and so forth. So you're very familiar with that. These 2 divisions are to go in as partners. 29th, of course, is new to combat, and the 1st, as I said, has been there a little bit. So you're looking here just exclusively at the 1st Division, or Big Red One side of the beach. And you can see these WN, and that stands for Widerstandsnest, and my German language skills are not good, so my apologies for the butchered pronunciation. But basically, these are resistance nests or strong points, because the Germans don't have, tons of manpower to throw at this problem of defending all these beaches. So they got these strong points, fortified, sometimes like with bunker reinforced areas, designed to protect the beach exits, because really their objective is to pin down an invader and slaughter them along the beaches here. And that's what the Widerstandsnests are designed to do, to defend every potential exit at Omaha Beach. And in the Big Red One side, all of them are natural exits. There are no roads, no developed or built roads on the Big Red One side of the beach. So you're looking here at the various sectors that the planners have delineated: Fox Red, Fox Green, Easy Red. And you can see there's an obstacle belt. The Germans really begin to build up the number of obstacles and the sowing of mines in about the 3 to 4 months before D-Day happens, to the point where Allied planners are really worried about this. And about 1 out of every 4 American soldiers who hits Omaha Beach on D-Day is an engineer to try and deal with this. The Army and the Navy create combined units called Gap Assault Teams to deal with this obstacle belt here. Once the assault begins, they take heavy casualties. So this is serious business in terms of the obstacle belt that you're dealing with here. Not to mention the mines. And there's a lot of mines sown in the dead spots between the WNs here, between the strong points, for the obvious reason that the Germans don't have enough troops, and so they're going to cover the open areas with mines, and the terrain is ideal for concealing mines. You can see the 6 strong points that the Germans have here on the Big Red One side of the beach. How many guys are there on the German side? I've delved into this with a lot of research, and I don't think we'll ever know for sure, but I would estimate it's probably nothing more than about 500 soldiers. A composition of units from the 352nd and 716th Infantry Division. So it's like an understrength battalion, but of course they're armed with some pretty serious weapons. A pair of heavy concrete bunkers here at WN62 with 75 millimeter pieces, an 88 millimeter piece and a heavy concrete bunker here. And it's one of only 2 88s that the Germans actually have at Omaha Beach, the other one in the 29th sector, and they were set up to bracket the beach on either side. So the other one is closer to Veerville, which would be on this direction of our map. And this one here is at WN61. Interestingly enough, the bunker still exists to this day, the concrete bunker, and now it is a private home. So maybe that represents progress. WN60 includes similar fortifications, but not an 88, but it has the advantage, as I'll show you in a moment, of just incredible sight lines and fields of fire. WN62 has the most actual personnel and weapons. There's like what are called toe brooks. It's like a concrete opening, like a circular concrete opening that you put a machine gun post or a mortar post, rifleman, something like that. And I would argue really the most dangerous weapon the Germans have at WN62 is an intact concrete observation bunker for artillery observers, because unseen on our map here, and I think sometimes overlooked in our sort of popular memory of Omaha Beach, is the German inland artillery. They have 24 artillery pieces, anywhere from about 3 to 1 miles inland, all of which are pre-sighted on this beach and can wreak havoc, as you would imagine. In addition, of course, to the guns you have in the famous bunkers and casemates, you have a 50 millimeter piece here at WN65, so on and so forth. You also have Nebelwerfers that would be located off our map. Those are known as Screamin' Mimes, and obviously it's a mortar-like weapon that hurls large shells. So this is pretty formidable. Now, this is what it looks like all these decades later, and the vantage point is from WN60. So there's WN60, and you are now looking from the vantage point of WN60, and you can see the entire crescent of Omaha Beach, that 4.5 miles. You may wonder, is this Pointe du Hoc? No, it's Pointe de la Percée. Pointe du Hoc would be a little farther beyond it. But you can see it's this crescent bowl in which an invader could get bracketed in there, and you could have plunging fire along the entire beach because you're looking down from high ground, which is one of the reasons why the planners know that Omaha Beach is such a tough nut to crack. Now, of course, there's a lot more greenery and trees than there would have been on D-Day. Most of this has been cut down for fields of fire and observation. Of course, obviously, there's no parking lot down there and no tourists on D-Day. But there's obstacles out here, and of course, the various strong points that you could see sprinkled in there, and you'd see remnants of them. So WN62 would be here, WN61 just below out of our line of sight here, and then you're looking from WN60. So it gives you a sense, and just sort of taking in that image, and this is at higher tide, gives you a sense of what the beach might look like to a German defender, or at least the kind of line of sight that he could have, maybe, albeit you're looking at a lot of trees here, and you can just get a sense of the beach and how it's the challenges you might have, assaulting it. There's the pre-invasion bombardment is almost completely inadequate. I would say almost next to useless. The heavy bombers have been asked to do a job that they really can't do, which is precision bombing in a tight window ahead of a friendly fleet. You're talking about a 1,000-meter window here for planes that are, aircraft that are lucky to get a bomb within a mile or so of their target, depending on windage and clouds. And of course, as you probably realize, the weather leading up to D-Day was not good, which had forced the postponement for a day. And though the weather had gotten a little better on June 6th, it's still not ideal. So there's a lot of low clouds and the visibility isn't good. And none of those bomber crewmen want to take a chance on bombing their own people. So most of the bombs land inland, have no impact on the German defenses at Omaha Beach. Same is true for the naval bombardment. It's only about 45 minutes. And the reason for that is so that the Allies could have operational surprise when they landed on these beaches. And so there had been a lot of planning of pre-positioned targets that they were going to hit and all that. But the study I did of the 1st Division side of the beach revealed that, all that happened is that one flamethrower was knocked out of action and 2 guys slightly wounded. So the bombardment wasn't pleasant for the Germans, but when the Big Red 1 soldiers come ashore about 6:30-ish on the morning of D-Day, those defenses have been more or less untouched. And you're looking here at this map, at the way the battle develops. And the reason I show it to you is, our theme today is to discuss some of the first units that get off the beach and start to cause trouble for the Germans, what I've dubbed knives in the vitals. And I direct your attention specifically to here where it says Dawson and here is Spalding. We'll meet these individuals in a moment and kind of see how the story unfolds for them. But this then gives you a little perspective on where they were, how they're getting off the beach. You can see WN62 here. The Valley and draw, and of course WN60 over here, and the Saint Laurent draw over here. Again, you can get a sense of the sort of universe we're looking at. So what happens, in the sort of first wave hours, and I'm talking about for the first hour to maybe hour and a half to 2 hours of the Normandy landing, is that the tides are difficult. There's a lot of smoke and dust from the pre-invasion bombardment that creates visibility issues. Landing craft are going to tend to get pulled in an easterly direction because of the tides. The D-Day assault plan was predicated on the idea that you're going to have a combined arms assault that will overwhelm the Germans. What I mean by that, the engineers are going to come in, do their thing here against the obstacles. Infantry are going to land right with them. Tanks are going to land all concurrently to present the Germans with too many targets, to saturate them with combined arms firepower, and to basically overwhelm them. But what actually happens as a result of the confusion, the tides, the bombardment, the German opposition, is that units land piecemeal, one by one, giving the Germans opportunity to kind of catch their breath and then refocus. And of course, a lot of the units land in the worst possible spot, in the kill zones right here underneath the snout of WN62, over a little towards Fox Green, closer to WN60. All of this just simply goes awry, within the first half an hour plus. And so you're presented with the disquieting possibility that wave after wave will just simply pile up here and just get slaughtered by this German firepower that we've discussed. So the troops are also seasick, from being in their landing craft for probably at least about an hour and a half before landing. They're wet, they're tired, they're scared, they're confused. They're wearing supposedly gas-resistant uniforms just in case the Germans use poison gas. And those uniforms are uncomfortable, they're itchy, they don't breathe, they stink like sour milk, so they were called skunk suits. And in the great American tradition of sending soldiers into combat with tons of stuff, every one of these assault troops is carrying way too much. I would say an average of between 70 and 120 pounds of gear. And all this at a time when you could be landing in water over your head. You're landing at low tide, though, and low tide at Omaha Beach probably means about 500 yards or so of open beach, in which you could be a target anywhere. Why low tide? Because it's easier to identify those obstacles that we had discussed. So, you're looking at a situation when most of these guys who are getting ashore are really not at their best. Some of them are swamped in the water. Some of them are at the water line. Some of them are pinned down on the beach. Some of them are taking shelter behind obstacles, which is very dangerous because not only are those pre-sighted areas, but some of the obstacles have mines on them. And also the gap assault teams, the engineers, are trying to blow holes through the obstacles. And so their explosives could be dangerous to you. There's tanks that are trying to move around, and they may or may not see you. Of course, many of the tanks have infamously, tried to wade ashore. The DD duplex drive tanks that were launched about 3+ miles offshore, and 27 out of 32 of them sink. So you just got an incredibly chaotic situation, and I think it's kind of summed up by a guy named PFC John McPhee, who was like an 18-year-old kid in superb physical condition, a young rifleman. But he's so sick, he's so overloaded, he's so wet, and he's so exhausted by the time he gets ashore that, as he put it later, I didn't care if Adolf Hitler himself was waiting for me. So instead of moving around like rabbits, they're staggering around like tortoises, which makes them an even better target. They're in shock, they're nauseous, they're stumbling under heavy burdens, and of course the German opposition is ferocious. The firepower is just awful, So the survivors then are pinned down, many of them, more or less along here at the low water mark and at what's called the shingle bank that I'll show you a little bit later on, which is basically like smooth stones on this upswing, this embankment, that it is tempting to kind of take cover there because you think that you are safe. You may be safe for the moment from some machine gun and small arms fire, but the problem is the Germans have mortars and that artillery, and a lot of it can come in along the shingle bank. And of course, the stones add to that multiply the fragmentation effect. And so anybody taking cover in the shingle bank is going to be in a lot of danger. But of course, you're not sure where else to go or what else to do. Units are mixed up. They've been slaughtered. Landing craft are broached. The German fire is constantly coming in. There's all this smoke and dust. You don't know what's going on. And so that's why I do think that it is particularly important to focus on some of these first groups to begin to get off the beach, because it gives some level of direction and definition to the battle that the Americans are fighting there at Omaha Beach. I should mention, too, medics are circulating around, risking their lives, trying to save people at the waterline, like around here. It's one of the few battles, Omaha Beach is, in which a medic is going to try and move a casualty closer to the enemy rather than farther away, because if you move them farther away, obviously that's into the water. And so you don't have anywhere near enough landing craft or shipping earmarked for the evacuation of casualties. It's one thing I would criticize about the invasion plan. And so you've got a situation which could be careening toward disaster, possibly, if this kind of thing continues. Okay, so here I'll show you this guy. Second from right, you can see the infantry lieutenant here is a guy named Lieutenant John Spaulding. E Company, 16th Infantry, 1st Infantry Division. John Spaulding is pictured there with his brothers. And Spaulding came from Owensboro, Kentucky. He had worked as a sports writer in civilian life. He was passionate about baseball. He was a big baseball fan, had played at earlier in life. And he had a young wife and an infant at home. So Spaulding had joined the Army as a private soldier, and he eventually goes to OCS and makes it through OCS as a young infantry lieutenant. Now, even though I think he's 29, he's either 29 or 30 on D-Day, and I think D-Day was his birthday, believe it or not. Even though he's a little older, this is his first day in combat. And it's his first day in combat leading a fairly combat experienced group of what was called a boat section. It's basically an understrength platoon of about 32 guys. That's as many people as you can get on a Higgins boat. So Spaulding is well trained and well prepared for this in a way, but still he's a rookie. It's his first day in combat, but yet he's in charge too, so he's at the front of the landing craft, as the officers always were supposed to be, to lead the way. And you'll notice that sometimes in some of the photographs you see of D-Day, you see like a photograph of a soldier from behind, you see that vertical hash mark on the back of their helmet. That means that's an officer. If you see horizontal, that means it's an NCO. And Spaulding is blessed with one of the finest NCOs in the entire Big Red One, if not in the entire American Armed Forces, Tech Sergeant Phil Strasik. Strasik came from a big Polish-American family in New Jersey, 10 kids, and had to leave school after the 8th grade in order to work during the Depression to help his family get by. So he had some education, but not all that much. And he, of course, joined the Army, and he had fought in North Africa and in Sicily, and he had already received the Distinguished Service Cross. If you had taken a poll among Big Red One soldiers and asked them, who's the most courageous soldier in the division? Who do you look up to the most? Phil Strasik would have gotten a lot of votes. So Strasik is the platoon sergeant, and he certainly knows his way around combat big time. But remember, he's not in charge. So you have a kind of an uncomfortable dynamic here between the rookie lieutenant Spaulding leading this platoon with this experienced sergeant, Phil Strasik. But what's interesting about it is that they will work this out in the course of D-Day. This will be a very positive kind of leadership. They land, if I go back, see what says Spaulding here. Okay, so they land right in the middle, like the heart of Easy Red. So you can see right about right here. They are the one boat section in E Company that lands in the place they're supposed to. Pretty much everybody else lands over here, right under the snout of WN62, and just gets decimated. So the Spalding-Strasik section is cut off, not literally, but in terms of just the reality of the battle, from knowing what's going on with the rest of E Company, lands at more or less the right spot. It's not an easy landing. They've been landed in these sandbars and have, come close to drowning. They've lost some of their equipment. But the good news is they haven't really been hit by much German fire. They've landed in the dead spot, which was the idea all along. So what do you do with that? Well, you start to move forward and try and get off that beach, because now you can, rather than getting pinned down at the shingle bank. Of course, the Germans have laid barbed wire, and they have mines, and they have little anti-tank ditches that are flooded, that are trying to prevent you from doing this. And you can, get a sense of the high ground you're looking at. So Spalding-Strasik maybe coming about here, roughly speaking, just going on dead reckoning. Okay, so Strasik has a very good understanding of how to sniff out mines, how to get through barbed wire. He and another soldier employ a Bangalore torpedo to get the section through the barbed wire. They start to move in and up the bluffs, dodging mines, mainly because Strasik has such a finely honed sense of where the mines will be, and figuring out the machine gun posts, the few machine gun posts the Germans have, that the Spalding-Strasik section ends up as this sort of demolition wrecking crew that starts to move in this way and move towards WN64, so westward, WN64, okay? And so, there's a couple of artillery pieces here. There are outguard defenses. There are trenches in here, all this kind of stuff. And so in the course of the D-Day morning and beyond, Spalding and Strasik are leading their guys kind of, sort of partnering, tag teaming back and forth, leading these small groups to overwhelm German defenses incrementally. And the significance of this is that they diminish WN64, in a way, WN65 over here, so much that it makes it possible for follow-on waves to come in without getting decimated. In the course of the day, they suffer casualties, 2 killed and 8 wounded. The Spalding-Strasik section received 7 Distinguished Service Crosses. And believe you me, they were richly deserved. Both Spalding and Strasik got the Distinguished Service Cross. Some people feel Strasik should have gotten the Medal of Honor. I can certainly see that too. But when you talk about contributions to getting off the beach, you could certainly argue that none did more than this group of guys here. Now, close on behind them is a unit led by this man, Captain Joe Dawson, who is the company commander of G Company 16th Infantry Regiment. Okay, so they are supposed to be the follow-on force behind that first wave that included Spalding-Strasik. So they're coming in about 20 minutes later. Joe Dawson was a fascinating dude. He had seen combat, plenty of it in the Mediterranean, but never as a commander. He'd been a staff officer. So he'd seen action, but he had not been the guy in command. He takes over G Company from a very good friend of his, a guy by the name of Ed Wozensky, who actually got moved to E Company to become company commander there. So he was Spalding's boss, who he was out of touch with most of the day. So Dawson takes over for the popular Wozensky, and he's not sure that his men have really accepted him, and he's determined to lead them from the front. And to lead them as courageously as possible. He was a college graduate. He had gone to Baylor University. He was the son of a very prominent Baptist minister. And Dawson was a geologist. He was involved in the oil business. And so it's kind of interesting because Dawson's knowledge of rocks gives him a sense of understanding, where the mines are likely to be, where they're not going to be, soil composition, and also the danger of the shingle bank and all this kind of stuff too. So his civilian expertise comes into play just a little bit, but really it's more, what his actions on D-Day are more about his personal character and determination to lead these guys in the way that he thinks is right, and that means from the front. So his company comes in about 20 minutes after Spalding at more or less the same spot. And you can see where it says Dawson G Company 16th Infantry. Okay, so they're going to follow on that path that Spalding and Strasik have created. And at one point, Dawson and Spalding are going to encounter each other and are going to coordinate their efforts, with Spalding, as I mentioned, deciding to go in this direction towards 64, and Dawson and his company deciding to go this way beyond 62 to the town of Colville, which, overlooks Omaha Beach even today. So Dawson's unit coming ashore and getting that far inland suffers something in about 50 to 60 casualties. But most of them are ambulatory. Most of these guys have taken like flesh wounds from mortar fragments, that kind of thing. Very few have needed evacuations. Of course, it's easy for me to say, safe and happy here, but, in civilian life, if you had mortar shells come in and take a hunk out of your neck or out of your wrist or something, it'd be a pretty big deal. For these guys, they're just going to fight on with it. So Dawson personally destroys one machine gun nest that is sort of the entryway to moving towards Colville. And he's almost like fighting out front, almost like as a lead scout, more so than a company commander, at least for part of the day. They end up, just like he and Spalding had envisioned, they end up destroying the outlying portions of WN62. And by the way, the two 75 millimeter guns here had been nailed by the tanks by about 7 a.m. or so. So in the course of the day, these Germans here are going to start to get cut off by G Company as it moves into Colville. And so G Company ends up fighting in Colville the rest of that day and into the evening. Tragedy of the whole thing, of course, is that you have a pre-planned fire mission by the Navy, by ships offshore on Colville. And it's supposed to happen like about 6 o'clock in the evening, roughly, unless they hear otherwise. And the communication is such that they never hear otherwise. So they're going to shell it without knowing that G Company is there. And so actually, almost everybody that Dawson loses killed on D-Day happens to friendly fire. I think he loses at least 7 killed. He also has an encounter inside the church at Colville, whose steeple you can still see today overlooking Omaha Beach. He and several of his men go in there and they encounter what I think is probably a German artillery observation team and kill them in a face-to-face encounter. And just, when you step back and think about the sad irony of that, here is a guy who considers himself to be a devout Christian, probably fighting other Christians in this house of God and fighting to the death. That's war. If that isn't the tragedy of war, I don't know what would be. So you can see then, if we just look at these two groups, and there are others within the Big Red One, closer to WN60 and so on and so forth, but I'm just focusing on these guys as an example of the larger whole. You can see that from a German point of view, now you've got these guys in around you, behind you, again, like knives in the vitals probing around, and that's not good news, is it? So the German defenses are getting destabilized. Okay, and you can see what we're looking at here as we go beyond that picture of Dawson. Okay, you're here like the heart of Easy Red. This is more or less, roughly, where Spalding comes ashore, where Dawson comes ashore. You can see the shingle bank. You can see the stones there. Get a sense of that. The terrain where mines could be anywhere here. The tree line represents a prominent ridge that overlooks Omaha Beach. So very advantageous high ground. And, in the present day, the Normandy American Cemetery is just beyond here, So you're looking here at more or less the place where they begin this journey. And you get a little sense, even all these years later, of, what that terrain might have looked like to them. And this view, you're looking from Easy Red towards WN60 up here. So this would be Fox Green over here, eastern part, WN62, Broods over here. See how you'd be kind of protected a little bit from WN62 over here, but you're looking down the expanse of the beach. And so again, you can get a little bit of sense of what they might have seen. Okay, so the takeaway, where does all this lead? Okay, so these first groups like Dawson and Spalding have knifed their way inland in that first hour and a half to 2 hours. And at that point, about 2 hours after H hour, this guy comes ashore, Colonel George Taylor, commander of the 16th Infantry Regiment. And, though mainly Omaha Beach is mainly a junior leaders fight. One exception is Colonel Taylor, the regimental commander, who is highly combat experienced and quite knowledgeable about amphibious operations because he's done them in the Mediterranean. And I think it's fair to say that perhaps the most famous phrase associated with Omaha Beach all these years later is only two kinds of people are going to be on this beach, the dead and those who are going to die. Now get the hell off the beach. Okay, well, one of the really regrettable things about the movie The Longest Day is it puts those words in the mouths of a different person. Brigadier General Norman Dutch Coda, played by Robert Mitchum. Actually, Colonel George Taylor, was the one who uttered those words. And what's interesting about this, too, I actually found that it wasn't spontaneous. The phrase was not spontaneous. He'd been thinking about it for months. Months before D-Day, he writes in a memo about amphibious operations and like a planning and training memo. He says, in a landing operation, there are two classes of men that may be found on a beach: those who are already dead and those who are about to die. So by the time Taylor comes ashore, you've had all this chaos, all the losses, these terrible losses to his regiment. His XO has been killed instantly with the first wave. His radio and communication gear is, like on the shingle bank. So are all sorts of hundreds of soldiers pinned down at the shingle bank still and along at the water line. And behind obstacles, all that business. Okay, so his contribution is that he brings order and inspiration. He goes up and down the beach at great danger to himself, urging people to get off the beach with that phrase: only two kinds of people, the dead and those who are about to die. Get off the beach. And the significance is that Taylor gives, it's like his contributions are twofold. He motivates people to get off the beach when they're vulnerable and helpless. A soldier on Omaha Beach on D-Day is a target. When he moves inland, he's possibly a hunter. So it's like you got a lot of people who are confused or frightened into inertia, and he gives them a direction, something to do, and getting off the beach certainly is very productive. Second, very important from the point of view of Spaulding, Dawson, and company. Once these guys get off the beach because of Colonel Taylor, it now reinforces those original knives and the vitals, which prevents then Spaulding from getting cut off and destroyed, Dawson from getting cut off and destroyed by counterattacking Germans. Once you have all these guys getting off the beach, in part because of Taylor, now you have this mighty host getting inland, outflanking the Germans, destroying the positions, moving to the coastal road. All that kind of stuff is really represents curtains for the Germans. And so you see this kind of teamwork lead to the outcome we all know that happens on D-Day, which is obviously the Americans forging a beachhead at Omaha Beach. But you're looking at a kind of map rendering of what you could see at the end of the day. By nightfall, it's not really a front line as such. It's mainly like these perimeters, and you've outflanked, surrounded, destroyed most of the WNs, though there are wayward German soldiers. But most of these guys who have survived to that point are just looking to get out of there. So you have these kind of clashes between small groups, patrols, during the night. You can see these little E symbols. That means engineers, and lots of them coming ashore to build roads and clear the mines out. All that kind of stuff is going on. And of course, the Americans have succeeded in taking Omaha Beach after a very, very difficult start. It had, of course, a great cost. By my estimate, the Big Red One suffered 1,174 casualties on D-Day, including 820 in the 16th Infantry. And that included 300 killed in action. I think that's an underestimate because it doesn't include some of the other units that are attached to them, like artillery and medics, engineers, and the like. Nearly 100 of those Big Red One soldiers are buried in the Normandy American Cemetery today. I encourage you to visit that when that becomes possible. And of course, so the toll it took was substantial. And as I think maybe many of you know, the D-Day Memorial has, over many years, led an incredible necrology project to document Allied casualties and particularly fatalities on D-Day and publish it in a remarkable book called We Will Remember Them. So I highly recommend that to you. So I think that a letter that Joseph Dawson wrote weeks after D-Day to his family maybe sums up, the larger meaning of Omaha Beach and D-Day, at least for some of those first groups, those Knives and the Vitals that got off the beach initially. He wrote, "What little satisfaction gained from it has been the belief that it was all worthwhile and that this was shared by all our loved ones and those who represent our nation." And, I think I really think when you look back at it, I think history has proven this statement to be 100% true. So I will conclude with that, and now attempt to answer whatever questions you have. I would be glad to entertain them.
Great, John. Thank you. That's a fascinating overview. And in terms of the number of casualties and fatalities, I'll also add, because someone at the First Division Museum was very quick to throw this out once when we were discussing numbers with them. The 116th Regiment was actually attached to the First Division on D-Day. It's, of course, 29th Division unit, but for command purposes, it was in the first. And so you could also add all of those very heavy losses to the First Division.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's correct.
If you have any questions, if you're watching on Facebook or on YouTube, just throw them into the chat, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. But let me start with one, John, that kind of takes the German perspective. As you know, and anyone's read a good bit about D-Day knows, there were a couple of different German ideas for opposing the invasion that they knew was going to happen eventually. Rommel believed we have to stop them at the water's edge on the longest day, and if they get inland, then the game is up. Whereas Rundstedt, his superior, said, in essence, we can't do that because we don't know exactly where they will land. We won't be able to move reinforcements, move our armor up. We're going to have to pretty much let them land and then move our forces to stop them. Obviously, the Germans failed. The day is victorious for the Allies. But as a historian looking back 77 years, which of the German commanders had the better idea? And what could the Germans have done to stop this invasion?
Yeah. Over the years, I've become a very strong proponent of the Rundstedt viewpoint. I think Rommel would have been well considered to study MacArthur's defense of the Philippines in 1941 and 42, in which he essentially tried to defend everything, and whoever defends everything defends nothing. You also began to see, as the Pacific War unfolded, that once the Americans began to gain control of the sea and the air, it meant they were probably going to get ashore. And so what strategic results could you achieve from any kind of battle like Kwajalein or whatever? From a Japanese perspective, you could not really stop them from getting ashore. What you could do is you could inflict massive casualties upon them, which in turn could change the political dynamic in the United States, for continuing the war through to unconditional surrender. So too, for Rommel now, the Germans by 1944, and Rommel knew this, had lost control of the air and the sea. And so no matter how many resources you invested in defending the beaches, even if you knew where the invasion was coming, it was still going to be something of a challenge to try and repel them at the waterline. And so, especially in the Normandy terrain, I think one of the great missed opportunities for the Germans is not fortifying the hedgerow country the way they could have. You can imagine if all that concrete and steel had been used in that maze of hedgerows, the kind of casualties the Allies would have had to have taken. And the other thing too, part of what Rommel and Rundstedt were really arguing about is the disposition of the German armor. And Rommel wanted it right at the beach for counterattacking on the beach. And to me, it's amazing to me that a guy who fought in the Mediterranean would even contemplate that for one moment. Because when the Germans had done that earlier in the war, Allied Navy had just wrecked them. It had happened at Sicily. It had happened at Salerno. It had happened at Anzio. It had happened to the Japanese a little bit too. So Rommel, to me, was not living in the real world in wanting to put tanks under the snouts of U.S. Navy destroyers and Royal Navy destroyers that were very fearsome weapons to them. And that's not even taken into account the problem of getting to the beaches and surviving Allied airstrikes and all that too. So yeah, I mean, it's a fun debate, but I really have been more on the Rundstedt side.
Could the Germans have moved their armor the way Rundstedt intended them to, given Allied air supremacy?
It would have been always a challenge, and that was, Allied air supremacy is a major game changer, and it's one of the ways that the invasion could succeed, because I should point out, invading Kwajalein is a different animal than invading France in a continental littoral operation. The Germans would have this great advantage if they know the time and place of the invasion to, obviously funnel their forces there, and it could be formidable, but air kind of changes the dynamic of that. That whether you're really going to be able to move people to the places you need them to go is an open question. What Rundstedt envisions, I think, is to have them in pre-position reserves where you could move them to wherever the threat may unfold. And I do think that as time goes on, he and the other major armor guy, Gerd von Schweppenberg, who's the general of armor and eventually gets sacked over this, whole thing too. They have this idea that you're going to use the tanks as like mobile artillery to confine the Allies to a beachhead and wear them down. And I really do think strategically that's probably Germany's best bet, because as it was, the Battle of Normandy raged for the better part of 3 months or so, and it was bloody, and it was a tough political dynamic in the Allied countries, especially Britain, saying, how long is this going to take? Where is this leading? How are we going to get out of Normandy? So there was some level of crisis, though obviously the Allies possessed, most of the advantages.
Excellent. You're speaking, of course, to a site in Virginia, and not too far up the road from where we are is a little school known as Virginia Tech, where a well-known alumnus was on Omaha Beach in the First Division. Tell us a little bit about Jimmy Monteith.
Jimmy Monteith had gone to Virginia Tech and hadn't done very well there. He was, like a lot of us, when we go to college as an 18, 19-year-old, not quite mature enough or ready, knowing what he wanted to do. He was the son of a guy who'd gone to Virginia Tech, and his brother had gone there, his older brother. Jimmy Monteith had left Virginia Tech, and when the war began, goes into the Army, and he finds a kind of new maturity in himself. Goes to OCS. And he joins the Big Red One for the Battle of, towards the end of North Africa, but really the Battle of Sicily is when he starts to earn his combat experience. So he is a member of the 3rd Battalion, 16th Infantry, that's over on Fox Green. And so he's dealing as a young platoon leader with WN-60 in the course of the day. And one of the biggest things that Lieutenant Monteith does is lead 2 Sherman tanks off Omaha Beach. And I'm still not sure how he would have done this, having seen that terrain so much and the steep embankment and everything, how he got those 2 Shermans off that beach onto the firepower of WN-60 and began to position them in such a way that, to degrade those German defenses and start to kind of sidestep around them is really pretty amazing. And of course, kind of death-defying, obviously. And later in the course of the day, he helped stave off a German counterattack that I wouldn't argue would have destroyed the beachhead or anything, but it certainly, if the German counterattack had succeeded, it puts the Germans behind some of the guns that the Allies have neutralized at WN-60, and it means probably larger casualties, heavier casualties, as the Germans can start to bracket the beach with fire again. Unfortunately, staving off that counterattack cost Monteith his life, and he gets a posthumous Medal of Honor. And so he is certainly obviously a legendary figure in Virginia, as he should be.
Hector sends in a question from Facebook. What was the biggest intelligence failure for Allied forces on D-Day or prior to D-Day?
I think prior to D-Day, it's not knowing that you're about to have a German naval attack on your exercise Tiger, often just called Slapton Sands. This is in April 1944. They are rehearsing for the invasion of Utah Beach. And so you have German, what are called E-boats, like torpedo boats, kind of equivalent to an American PT boat, that slips in and inflicts major damage on this convoy, including the sinking of several LSTs. We were talking earlier about how important they were for the invasion, and leads to extensive loss of life. I think that's an intel failure and not necessarily knowing that they're in play. But I also think when we're looking at the actual invasion, the intel failure that is most consequential is not necessarily one that's going to play out on D-Day, but after. And I'm alluding to the hedgerows, the hedgerow terrain that the Allies knew about but didn't know about in a weird sort of way. I mean, France is familiar territory. You know, people knew about hedgerows; they've been there, and yet they don't necessarily have a strong appreciation for what it's going to mean operationally. You know, and what it's going to mean in terms of how you're going to proceed in order, especially on the American side, because the Americans dealt with the worst of the hedgerow country. And I do think there was way too much preoccupation with a beach assault, with getting ashore. Sometimes at the expense of fighting in the Normandy hedgerows. So we kind of have to relearn how to fight a different battle.
Although I think it's also fair to say the most consequential intelligence failures are on the German side.
For sure. Yeah, the Germans are just completely hoodwinked and outthought, outflanked at almost every turn. Yeah, I mean, the best example is where Rommel is on D-Day. Rommel, the irony of ironies, this whole thing. Rommel, the guy who says we got to stop at the waterline, everything's going to be decided on D-Day. That's where we get the term, the longest day. And where is he on D-Day? He's back in Germany for his wife's birthday, and also to try and lobby Hitler for, you know, control of the tanks and all that. But still, it shows you that he has no idea that the invasion is coming on D-Day. And part of that is weather, too, I think.
Exactly. And that very much could have changed everything had the Germans had an inkling that we were coming that day or in those locations. So, yes, and it's easy to look back and find intelligence failures, but on the whole, what a great intelligence coup just to keep the secret for so long.
Right. Operation Fortitude, of course, is the prime example, especially Fortitude South, which tries to sell the Germans on the idea that you're going to have this massive first U.S. Army group invade Calais, and that's continuing even after D-Day, and the idea, well, there's going to be another invasion, Normandy just the first one, and a certain amount of German intelligence buys that, but also I think the 15th Army in Calais is partially immobilized by Allied air too, but still, it's a very successful operation. And I think too, it's important, for us as Americans, I think sometimes to realize that the British had major contributions, especially on the intel side, of capturing and turning most all the German agents who were in play and kind of using them to get the message that the Allies wanted to disseminate to the Germans. And that's another factor in why the Abwehr, German intelligence, is just completely outclassed by MI6 and SOE and added up. I mean, all of it.
Great. Before we run out of time, when's the sequel?
The sequel is called it's called Island Infernos, the U.S. Army Pacific War Odyssey, 1944, and it'll be out on November 9th of this year. So in just less than 3 months. Can't wait.
Time for Veterans Day.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then a third one for 45?
Yeah, the third one is tentatively titled To the End of the Earth, U.S. Army in the Defeat of Japan, 1945. I don't know the release date on that. Probably within a couple of years, I would guess. Mostly, it's written, but it's a matter then of production and a lot of other things we need to figure out in relation to that. But yeah, so the third volume, I don't know the release date, but Island Infernos will be out on November 9th. Excellent.
Well, we'll look forward to that. In fact, probably going to go on my Christmas list. So
appreciate it. Thank you.
Excellent. So. Well, John, this has been wonderful. We are at the end of our hour together, but not the last time we will have you virtually with us, and not the last time we'll have you in person with us as well. So
all right.
We look forward to seeing you again. But in the meantime, again, thank you to all you who have tuned in, and we look forward to our talk with Craig Simons next week to get a little bit about the naval component. And again, just go to our webpage, look for all our upcoming lectures, upcoming events, and check back frequently. So again, thank you very much, John. Have a good rest of your day. And
You too.
viewers, thank you very much. We'll see you soon.